Welcome to New England Lacrosse Journal's Chasing the Goal podcast, your destination for all things lacrosse. I'm your host, Kyle Devitt, and in studio, without me, is Mr. Jack Piatelli. Jack, how we doing?
Doing pretty well. You know, winter is upon us. I woke up this morning and frost all over my car, the lawn, so I had to warm up the car this morning. I actually just got back from Hawaii. I was in Hawaii playing in the Hawaii tournament, 60 and older. It was a lot of fun to watch. People said to me, what was the lacrosse like? I said, very, very slow. It was very slow, but it was a lot of fun. And we got some great news this week that the lacrosse is going to be part of the 2028 Olympics in LA. So I'm excited to hear that. Great for the game.
Yeah, don't cheer too loud. It's Sixes. Which is sorry to be dismissive. It's
a
great.
Step in the right direction,
I guess. You know, it's like, oh, we play lacrosse today in gym class. Right. Yeah, I think it is great. I wrote about it. You should support it. But you know, I explaining it to non-lacrosse people what Sixes is versus lacrosse is maddening. Like field lacrosse or even box. They're like, well, wait, why aren't they playing the other one? I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know. We're just trying to get everything together. We're trying to unite everything. And our guest today did a great job of uniting the Bryant Bulldogs last year, bringing them to a great record, winning record, and getting into the America East Tournament. Mr. Brad Ross, how we doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, we, I think we've been playing email tag for, I don't know, since you were named head coach over there at Bryant. We go back a little bit because I covered you for your pro career, playing for the Cannons and the Nationals. And yeah, we had some fun. We had some exchanges.
Yeah.
Mr. Brad Ross loves himself a deep shot. I love it. You were ahead of your time, man. Like, I really like as far as like 2-point lines and things go. I want to talk to you about that first, because that's what I'm excited to talk to you about, as well as being a coach, being a player. Like, I always remember you being one of the first guys to you pull up, man. You pull up and you rip like you're a long pole, but you're not. And it's awesome. Talk me through a little bit about how you developed that style in the pro league after being at Duke for so long.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's actually pretty funny, and I'm sure a lot of coaches feel this way, but I probably would have hated myself as a player, if I was coaching me. I think when you're going through that, certainly you kind of have your different skill sets. And that was one that just kind of developed for me and something that I became pretty good at. But, it's weird how now you look back on it, and we're kind of joking about how long it's been since we probably seen each other, just how you change, and I think now coaching and being in a different role, it's funny to me sometimes when, we hammer our guys all the time about shot selection and what types of shots you take. And then someone will send me an old video and be like, what are you doing here, coach?
I was going to ask you if that happens, because it definitely has to happen, right? Like the old YouTube highlights are everywhere.
Yeah, occasionally. You can't hide from that stuff anymore.
No.
Brad, do you say to yourself, how did my coach let me get away with that? Probably because it was going in, right? That's probably why.
Well, what's funny is we actually were talking about this as a staff, and something I believe in a lot as a coach. And Coach Janowski did a great job of this and certainly continues to the day. And I think when you're coaching offensive guys, like the most important thing that you got to do, in my opinion, is you got to fill them with confidence. And they got to feel like they're the best player on the field every time they go out there. And so, yeah, I think there's certainly some of that, when I was playing for Coach Dino and certainly kind of after that, you felt like you could do no wrong. And you're able to do some pretty cool things when you feel like that. So those are things that we're hammering our guys every day. And certainly there's discipline, there's different pieces, but we want to make sure when they walk on the field, they feel like they're the best guys on there.
That's got to be quite a challenge for you as a head coach to keep the motivation high and the confidence at a level that everybody wants to participate with 45, 50 guys on your roster.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something that if last year's team did anything really, really well, I think that they did a great job creating roles, creating values for everybody, that everybody had some sort of contributing factor, whether that is guys on the sidelines being juiced up on the sideline, providing their teammates juice, off the field stuff, because some guys did some really, really cool things last year from a program building perspective. So as long as everybody feels valued and feels like they have a role and they're contributing on the team, I think it's a little bit easier. But you're right. I mean, that's definitely a part. Unfortunately, they're only going to play 20, 25 guys on game day. So the other guys got to feel like they're contributing in some way, shape, or form, or else they're going to feel pretty hollow.
I think a big part of your success last year was developing an offense that kind of was totally different from the year before, whether it's graduation, guys leaving for a graduate year somewhere else, or even transferring in a couple of cases. When you got to campus and kind of saw what you had to work with, what was your first reaction?
Well, I actually tell this story a lot because people ask me about, some of the moves we made, and they'll say, oh, it was a genius move moving Goltz and Greninger to attack. But I tell them the first day that we had practice, we split up, go to the goal if you're an attackman. And I looked over, we had 4 attackmen. That was it on the entire team. So we met pretty quickly afterwards and figured out that, for us, how do we get your best 6 players on the field? And I actually say this in recruiting a lot, because people ask, like, how many attackmen are you taking or how many middies are you taking? And the game's changed so much from when I played. When I played in college, the middies stood up top, the attackmen stood next to the goal. Nowadays, like, everybody's everywhere, so you're just trying to figure out how to put your best 6 guys on the field. And for Aiden and Kevin, they were obviously, 2 of our best, if not our very best. So how do we get those guys on the field? I think with the change, as you said, it's funny. I coached for what I would consider defensive head coaches, for 14 years or so as an assistant. So when you get your first chance to kind of run it yourself, it's like, all right, boys, let's rally everybody. Here we go. We're going to play fast and enjoy ourselves. And we certainly did that.
I was going to say, like, watching the offense at Ohio State, which back when I was doing analysis for Inside the Cross, I was critical of it because I saw a lot of mid-range stuff. Right. And I thought that, there could be more cutters. Fast forward, all you ran was cutters and fun and gun. And you attacked from every single angle. Like, I feel like a big part of the success when I saw you guys play against good teams, bad teams, whatever, was the unpredictability of what you were doing. Not even the randomness of it, but the ability to get guys into spots where they could have good shots. Is that kind of part of what you're talking about there?
Yeah, I think specific to, like you mentioned, shot selection, that's something that we talk about almost every day. And I actually heard it. I don't remember who did it, but someone did a really cool video. I was watching it this summer. It was a good way to explain it. And they said, if you walk into an Apple store and they've got, 15 versions of iPhones and you got 60 seconds to get an iPhone, if someone hands you the iPhone 14, 5 seconds into the store, you're taking it. But if they hand you a 2, then you're probably going to hold out. So for us, like, figuring out what are good shots for the right people, because the reality is, and we kind of joked about, like, me as a player, if I put myself in a situation, maybe a 12-yard shot was a good shot for me, but it may not be a good shot for somebody else. And that's not to be critical of that person. We just have to have a pretty good understanding of who we are. I think the second part you mentioned about kind of some of the randomness to that, certainly we have, like, starting patterns and starting things that we do. But a lot of the really good stuff that happens in our offense is kind of in the later half of the shot clock, where you're right. Maybe a possession before a guy cleared through and this time he fades, or like the guy who was up top is now behind the goal. You try to create some unpredictability for the defense so that you can get some more of those kind of what I would call blown assignment type goals.
Do you find players coming in as freshmen, you talk about, playing to your strengths. You find that a lot of players don't know or understand what their strengths are, and you've got to actually teach them, you're stronger shooting the ball from 10 yards out versus 12 or 15.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a process for a lot of these guys. I mean, I think we have guys that have played at, really, high achieving high schools and quote unquote hotbed areas. And then you've got guys that maybe haven't. So maybe for some of those guys who haven't, they've been asked to do more. And, certainly that is a highlight of their game because maybe they can do some pretty incredible stuff. But then at the same time, you kind of scratch your head and say, what the heck were you doing there? So there's certainly a process for them. I think what I've seen is, with the evolution of offense, like I said, a while ago, long time ago, everything was top down. There were certainly more two-handed players in the past. There's a lot more kids, though, that are well-versed in wing dodging and pick play and two-man games than they were 10 years ago. So I think guys are certainly farther along, but that's not to say that they're going to do it the way that we do it. So there is a pretty long process in teaching them how we want to play.
At the beginning of the show, I said you won the America East tournament, but that means you went to the NCAA tournament and played Hopkins, a team that you have a lot of history with as a player and coaching against at Ohio State. That game didn't go great for you guys, but getting there, I think, was one of the most fun journeys, I think, of any team in New England at Division I level. You continuously surprise teams. I mean, even your championship game in the America East final was you beat Albany in a double overtime game. And I remember watching it live, and the stream wasn't great, but I'm watching, I'm just like staring. I'm like, what? Because there was a couple saves at the end. You couldn't tell if they were goals or not. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, Aiden Goltz just pops up, gets the winner, and everything kind of exploded. Can you talk about a little bit about the season and that moment, and then knowing you're going to get to the NCAA tournament?
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that I've been so lucky to have in my career is just be around incredible head coaches and like really different people, whether it was playing for Coach Pressler in college and then Coach Janowski and then working with Lars at Brown and then kind of flipping the player coach relationship with Coach Pressler and coming here as an assistant, with him, and then Nick Myers and Joe Amplo. You learn a lot about just different styles of leadership and different kind of ways to run your program. And one of the things that I learned from Joe that I thought, has been really impactful for me is as a leader, there's really three things you got to do. Number one, you have to tell people where they're going, right? So what's the vision for the program? What are the goals that you want to set, right? So that was one of the first agenda pieces that, we set out for the team. The second thing, and probably the most important thing in your program, is the mission of the program. So, right, we tell you where you're going, we tell you how to get there. And that's the really important part, because if I just give you a set of car keys and say, go to California, but I don't give you the GPS, you have no idea how to get there. So for us, the mission's pretty clear. Number one, love each other. And we'll talk about each of these for a second. Love the process. And the third one's overachieve. Okay. I'll come back to the mission in a second. And then the last part are going to be like those principles and pillars of your program. So the reason why I went here, Kyle, is like, I think about the mission of the program. Number one, right, create meaningful relationships. I think I don't try to sound, super old when I say this, but I'm definitely in a different generation, the guys that we're coaching. And the lack of deep, meaningful relationships on teams is pretty startling sometimes. Guys will play with each other for 3 years, but have no idea that, that kid lost a family member or he has a brother with special needs. Like, they don't know anything about each other. So that's something we spend a lot of time doing. The second part, love the process, is one of my favorite parts, of the job. I hate the word grind, right? That's a word that's outlawed in our program, because I think everybody, when you say grind, you get this like negative connotation of, I'm getting on the train, I'm going to New York City, like this sucks. The reality is, for us, you're playing lacrosse with your friends. You're shooting lacrosse balls, you're doing 4-on-3s, you're lifting weights. So if it feels like a grind, we're probably doing something wrong, right? Or you're doing something wrong. And the last part is overachieve, right? That's the third part of your mission, is overachieve. And I thought last year's team, as I mentioned, they did two things really well. Number one, they created roles and had value for everybody within the program. And then, number two, they overachieved. There's no doubt about it. When you look at some of the guys who the program lost, and there were 10 guys that were on the roster in 2022 that were on different Division I rosters in 23. And for that team to overachieve was pretty special and pretty remarkable, and really proud of them.
Yeah, I think one of the things to highlight there is the brotherhood of being on a lacrosse team. I think is always, I didn't realize this when I was coaching in college. I didn't realize that you had to manage relationships too. You didn't just get the practice thing and get your game schedule and get that ready and do your recruiting. It was like, oh no, I have to make sure that they're having fun. They like each other. I coached a lot of teams where dudes didn't like each other. I was on a lot of teams where dudes didn't like each other.
Didn't like you.
Well, I'm not telling that story yet. We'll save it for another podcast. I had a real bad practice one day, and we'll talk about it sometime. But there was definitely, I think the hardest thing when you're a player going to be a coach, or you're going to another level and you're in a new place, is trying to establish yourself as who you are and kind of give an identity to the program. And a lot of people kind of lean on who they are as a person early on in their coaching career. And then they evolve into, okay, I have to coach these guys as humans, not lacrosse players or depth charts or positions. Like, these are people, and you have to kind of get them to get along. Because if you don't do that, you're never going to win. And that's what winning comes from. I really believe that now. And I know that from the last 3 years, being an assistant at the high school level, like and being a JV coach, like getting guys to have fun and like each other is a huge part of the job. And it's one of the biggest pieces of advice I give to new coaches or people that are coaching kids, even, is just like have fun, man. Like, don't be the coach everyone's scared of. No one wants to play on a team where they're scared of the coach. That's over. That might've been the way, rest in peace, Bobby Knight. That might've been the way he did it. It might've been the way his generation did it and the generation after that. But sports are different now. Kids are different now. You have to adjust and you have to adapt. So I think it's a great point to make. And it's a good system to build culture, which people use that word. That's a word that should be outlawed in everything I do. I can't stand that word. It's like, what does that mean? What are you saying when you say to me, your culture is this?
Yeah. There's a couple, I think, important points there. I actually, I do agree with you on culture. It's a word that's overblown, not the importance of it, but right. Just that word. I like the word environment more. I think a lot about that. We talk about in recruiting, talk about our team. Like, everybody's got these great things that they put up on the wall. And I talked about a little bit ago. But if you want a real snapshot at someone's culture, like, go to a practice, go into the locker room. And it's more about the micro interactions than it is these like big moments. I think the second piece there, Kyle, too, is like, I do have a little bit different perspective on leadership. And I do think it's important that, like, when people talk about old school leadership versus kind of new school, it's not like negative or positive. They're just different styles of leadership, and there's certainly times that calls for maybe one style and another time that calls for another. But I do look at leadership a little bit more east-west than north-south, and especially on these big teams. It's really hard to look at leadership very linearly, where it's the coach and then the associate head coach and the captains, because often you get kind of paralyzed by that. So for us, one of the first things that we taught them is the most important primary characteristic of leadership is if you have influence, you have leadership, right? So everybody on the team has influence over someone. So that was kind of one of the first starting messages, is that, like, stop looking to the coach, stop looking to the captains. You need to lead, certainly somebody else. And there's a secondary point to that, and this is maybe a little bit counterculture, but like, this whole concept of lead by example, I'm not a huge believer in. Not like leading by example is a bad thing. It's just, I typically, when someone says I lead by example, I'm not much of a vocal leader. I say, okay, like, what are you doing? And they say, I do extra work. I go to class. Socially, I'm squared away. They list all these things that, in my opinion, are just baseline characteristics of being a part of our program, right? True leadership is the ability to make people better. So for a lot of these guys, certainly they may not have influence over a senior or a fifth year, but they certainly have it over, a classmate. So how they're leading each other is really important.
And leadership is selfless. Like, I have learned that. I've come to learn that. I mean, even managing freelancers for New England Lacrosse Journal, it's like, if I don't put your work first, I'm not doing you a good job. Like, I know that I do my own job. I already know that I know how to do that. I'm good at that. But getting you to believe that you're good at it too is a big part of it. And I was talking about selfless leadership. Like, the way to influence people is sometimes by example, like you're saying, but not always. A lot of it is, I like the positive side of it. And I do think you're right. There is a time for kind of negative, and, there is a time, I think, in every season for every coach where, listen, sometimes you flip out, like, sometimes it's enough. And I do think that happens.
Out about.
Right. It has to be something constructive. You can't just flip out because a kid's late. Like, I don't think that's
I break down mistakes into 3 categories, right? I think there's physical mistakes, there's mental mistakes, and then there's like effort mistakes, right? Mm-hmm. So very rarely, if ever, are we going to criticize someone on a physical mistake. And this kind of comes back to your time as a player. Like, I've always hated when coaches are like yelling at kids to catch the ball. Like,
Yeah.
I know I tried to, right? Now there's a secondary part of that of like, if they're not putting the work in on their own, then you certainly can kind of square them up about it. But, where you can get after guys is right mental mistakes, right? If they're not in the right spots because they haven't, put enough time into it. But the last one is the one that we're hardest on, is just effort. Like, people talk about non-negotiables, but for us, like the two things when you come to practice every day that we talk about every single day is being excited to be there, having juice, like just being out of your mind to be on the practice field. And the second is what we're talking about, is how hard you play. And I think there's, for whatever reason, there is this, in my opinion, like wrong piece of people think that like having fun and being excited and being disciplined and tough are mutually exclusive. That you can't have fun and enjoy yourself, but like not take bad shots. I totally disagree with that. And I think for the long term of a program, if kids are excited and they're happy to be at practice, then they're going to put in more time. Like they're going to enjoy lacrosse. They're not going to associate practice with negative stuff, so that they're more likely on a Sunday, or a second session, during a practice day, of getting out there and getting some shots up.
Hey, it's Bobby Moran, Director of Athletics at Thayer Academy. You know what? Experience matters, and Thayer Academy's professional coaching staff understands how to work with each student athlete to help them succeed. Our coaches and faculty are committed to ensuring both 5th to 12th graders feel known, connected, and prepared. This is Thayer's secret sauce, nurturing each student to reach their full potential. Here, success is truly a team sport. Are you ready for your child to take the next step? See what Thayer has to offer at thayer.org. That's THAYER.org.
I think in some cases with programs, players have lost the enjoyment in playing the game. It's become more of a business than it has an actual game. What are your thoughts on that?
When I think about the way, maybe the style and some of the things that, we do now, I think people who know me are really surprised, because like from a kind of background and where I've been and kind of who I was, if I had told myself 10 years ago that like our sidelines would behave the way that it does, I would have laughed. But like when you guys are talking about maturing and growing up, like it's really hard for those guys who don't play to be into it.
Right.
As coaches, we're like, oh, you got to be into it, but what are they supposed to do? When you score a goal, they're supposed to golf clap on the sidelines. Like it's not easy to not play,
Right.
So I think some of these things, like how can we make sure that people are feeling value and enjoying themselves when maybe they're not having that opportunity on game day?
And the other thing is, you've got freshmen coming in that might take a spot from a guy that's been starting for you for 3 years. The expectation is, to your point, be a leader now. Another guy took your spot. It's got to be very challenging for the players, but in order to have a successful program, the environment you want to build, you got to bite your tongue and you got to continue to work hard, but you've got to encourage not only guys you're playing with, but maybe guys that beat you out in the position that you want to play.
And I thought Ampel had a good saying for that. He used to say, accept your role, right? But you don't have to like it. Like you might be in a position where, like you said, you maybe lost a position. You need to accept that fact and you need to execute what the team's asking of you, right? It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be happy with it, but you have to do, what we ask of you. There's no doubt to that.
Like when I came in for the podcast and Jack was doing it by himself.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like, hey, now we're together, and you are stuck with me, my dude.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
You are stuck. It is.
Brad,
it is a rough run.
I got a question regarding your playing days. You were 3-time All-American. You went to the Final Four at Duke. I believe it was 4 years in a row. Become a coach. Was it difficult for you to coach after having such a great career? Like you, highly motivated guy, very successful, like 3-time All-American. Were your expectations of players you coaching to have the same passion, desire, work ethic that you did? Was it difficult to get on the field and and understand and realize that not everybody likes the game as much as I do, that doesn't have the passion, desire, and the work ethic that I have. And how do you change that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one I've probably struggled with my whole life, because I've always felt like, even when I was at the high school level, that you cared more than everybody else around you. I don't pretend to have a magic answer for that. I do know that transition from college coaching to, from, college playing to college coaching is never easy. I actually remember like it was yesterday. I think it was like midway through the fall. I remember calling Ronnie Caputo and saying, this is my first year at Brown. It's like, it's really hard scoring goals. Like, I don't remember it being this hard. And he kind of said, okay, listen, those 6 guys that you played with,
Yeah.
5 of those guys were ML All-Stars last year.
Right.
So it's not going to be easy. I think certainly, coaches go through things where they all grow and learn. And I'm very lucky to have a guy that, we just kind of sent off into the coaching ranks and had turned down a finance job. I'm really proud of him. But that is a hard process, because I think when you're really young too, like there's a balance of being the young coach on staff that's relatable, but at the same time, like you're not friends with the players. And that's everybody's challenge, I think, for at least the first, 3 or 4 years that you're coaching.
How did you overcome that? Because I remember that too. I remember players like were my age, and I was just like, oh, this is weird. Like, do I just like, am I just like a jerk? Like, how do I get them to be in line?
Gosh, you talk about weird. Because of everything, that happened at Duke, I coached Reed Seligman. It was literally one of my best friends in college. And I coached him my first year at Brown. One of the things that I shared with Connor McMahon, who's at, Fairfield now in his first year, I think when you're a young coach, the way that you can kind of try to build these relationships is teaching them some skills that maybe they don't know, right? I think that's a great way to just start a relationship of, hey, this is a way you can do things, right? Or this is something that worked for me or worked within my program. And then, kind of build some credibility with them on that first part. And then you have to work at the relationship part. I think certainly it's not an easy process. I said, I don't think there's a magic answer to that, but you have to give them something to say, okay, this guy A knows what he's talking about, right? And B, he just wants to make me better. And that's ultimately what you got to do, obviously, as every coach, but especially as a young assistant coach.
I'd like to talk about recruiting. You mentioned it earlier, but I'm very impressed with coaches like yourself who've had a lot of success at, Navy, Ohio State, Duke. Now, obviously, you had a great season last year. Being able to navigate and understand the players that will be able to fit in your program, not only fit, I'm going to talk about fit, but have success. Was that difficult for you to, find? How do you know what guy you're recruiting is going to be successful at Bryant after having been at Navy and Ohio State, and you're recruiting completely different players academically and athletically?
Yeah, good question. I think there's a common misconception, at Navy, for example, that all of those kids dreamed of being in the military. I don't think that could be farther from the truth. I used to say if we called 10 kids, maybe one of them, would say, yeah, my dad served and I'm really interested in it. Maybe 1 or 2 of them say I have no interest in it. And the other 8 just had no idea, So I think like getting people onto campus at whatever institution you're at and letting them experience that place firsthand is really important. And in some ways, I feel like that, here, if people haven't been to campus, they don't know the facilities we have here. They don't know how highly ranked the business school is. So there's a little bit of a process of getting people over a hump of maybe what they believed about a place, right? Whether they believed it about Ohio State or Navy or here, you get them here, and then you're trying to kind of really have them understand what the reality is of an institution. With regards to here, I think for us, one of the things you've heard me talk about a lot is effort and having fun. Those are things that we talk about in the recruiting process with kids, and you're trying to identify that on that visit. How personable is somebody? Are they someone that we feel like would fit in the locker room, that can fit into kind of what we're promoting here? Because if they're not, they're going to have a hard time fitting in, certainly, and probably not a great fit for the kid, or us. But I also don't pretend to think that we're perfect in that either. It's really hard, quite honestly, in a recruiting process. You talk to a kid a couple of times, he visits once, twice, and then you got to make a decision. That can certainly be challenging.
Sure. Now, the other thing that I'm sure you talk about in the recruiting process, now that you're at Bryant, is I think it's a hidden gem, is that you're in the Ocean State, one of the most beautiful states in the country, surrounded by the ocean. Great area to live, and obviously for the players, I'm sure it's a great place. And I've been on your campus a number of times, and the progress they've made in the facilities, the indoor facility you have, and the new stadium, and for a small school, it's really very impressive.
Yeah, and the reality of it is it's only improving. I laugh when I was here and as an assistant. Casey Broderson and I were literally in a janitor's closet in the basement, like no windows. The weight room was in the basement. It was carpeted. There were 6 racks. And now just in the current year, they just finished up the new field hockey facility. They're breaking ground shortly here on addition to Burns Stadium, new training rooms, new film rooms, new locker rooms. And then probably the most exciting thing for us is that we are moving the business school across the street to its own campus, right? Expanding that part of it. But I think that goes back to what I was saying, that you just got to get people here and they can see it, with their own eyes, and they walk away, really impressed.
I mean, you talk about the history of Bryant. It was a D2 school 20 years ago. I mean, I was coaching against Coach Whipple on the sideline, like back in the day with St. A's and Franklin Pierce. And to see it now, it doesn't even look like the same place.
Right.
Like even driving in, you're just like, wait. I remember I did a campus visit in I think probably Presser's second to last year. And he's like, oh yeah, meet me in the new building. And it's like, wait, what is it? It's like a office attached to a weight room that has like a wall you can play wall ball on. I was like, what is this? Yeah. How did you build this? It's out of, and I remember going to tournaments there growing up and stuff. And I was like, what, this came out of nowhere. How is this here? And I think that expansion, like people don't realize unless they've been there previously and now they're there. They're like, oh, well, it's different. Everyone talked about like that arch you don't walk under unless you graduate, and now it's this huge sprawling thing.
Yeah. And I do think, what makes this place a little bit unique, there's no mystery here in a lot of places that, I think academics and administratively sometimes kind of butt heads because you're fighting over the same resources. I think what our administration, has realized and has done a really good job is just seeing how athletics can improve, the profile of an institution nationally. And that's something that they've really identified and seen. And they've done a great job, certainly supporting us and making sure that we have what we need to be successful, and that we coincide then and help bring hopefully more talented students and notoriety to the place.
I think one of the things that I want to touch on recruiting again from a different angle that Jack attacked it from, you guys find a lot of not raw, but I would say like guys from areas that a lot of other places don't traditionally hit. Like you have tons of Maine kids, like not only on your team, but coming up through the ranks that have committed to you guys. And like, how do you pick those guys out? Because I know that they do play in the tournaments. Obviously they're all in the same thing. It's not like they're in a bad place learning how to play lacrosse, but you pick the best of Maine continually. And I've seen it, especially the last, this is your class this year. You picked out some really good players. I know you can't talk about them, but how do those kind of kids fit in? Like kids from small towns, kids from non-traditional areas. You also have Massachusetts kids, Long Island kids, Maryland kids. How do you meld that? And how does that shape your recruiting approach?
I think when we were talking about before, kind of Bryant being like a hidden gem, I think what you get naturally with some of the New England kids is they have more historical context with the school. It's not completely new to them, and they kind of know, what the calling cards of the place is. So I think for us, certainly that's exciting to be able to recruit some really good players, from New England. I think one of the emphasis you've seen, in recruiting, as you mentioned, I can't, speak to it, but a heavy emphasis on recruiting Long Island, right, harder. I think specific to that, like the location, you're 3 hours, from Long Island. So for a family who wants to maybe have their kid, get off the island for college, but be close enough to see games, it makes a ton of sense. And I give the previous staff a ton of credit, for recruiting, as you said, some of these like non-hotbed kids who are athletic as heck, certainly have some work to do maybe in other areas, but the reality is the game's changed so much. When I think about my last year at Navy, our two best middies were from Texas and Colorado. So you have to do a good job as a coach of making sure that you're watching all the teams and the different club teams. But then there's the last part of it that I do believe relationships are really important in recruiting, and there's some coaches who don't listen to club coaches or listen to high school coaches. I do. I just think that they're the ones that know them. And, certainly some people do a better job of it than others, but you have to trust some people, because the reality is you can watch a kid play 3 or 4 times, but sometimes that can be hard to make a decision, after 3 and 4 times. So that's where relationships come in, I believe, from a club and high school perspective.
How involved are your assistant coaches, Travis Harrington, Chris Gabrielli, and Cole Pecora, involved in the recruiting process?
100%. They're going to be on the road, every weekend in November, as will I. Like I said about relationships, if you don't trust your people, then what are they there for? I think ultimately I've always prided myself on recruiting, and so I certainly do a lot of it. But, they are all obviously very experienced and have had great success in all different stops of their way. And so we've got to collectively come together to put together the best class that we can. And I think naturally some of these, as I mentioned, some of these relationships, like I may have stronger relationships in, Maryland, for example, because that's where I'm from. Whereas, like Gabs knows everybody in Long Island, right? And Travis is from upstate and Cole's from Connecticut. So you've got kind of a nice little, spreadsheet there of different relationships and different people that and we can all kind of lean on our people, for some of these comments about recruits.
Now, when you hire your assistant coaches, is that something that you take in terms of whether you hire them, where they're from, if you have, 2 guys from Long Island, or is it more based on can they do the job and what experience they bring to the table?
I think for me, my process was very unique, because when I was an assistant coach, I always said that, when I was ever fortunate enough to become a head coach at the right place, that I would want to try to surround myself, if I could, with people that I knew and had existing relationships with. So when you look at our staff here, Coach Gabs coached me in college. He was my defensive coordinator at Duke, and we've been close, ever since. And when he was at PC, so their PC's loss is our gain, right? Bringing Chris in, and he's been unbelievable. And Travis, I coached. He graduated in 2012, and had a great relationship with him and helped mentor him through his process. So kind of a unique dynamic there. And then with Cole, the reality is for Cole, kind of the way he got here is when I was hired, I just called a bunch of people that I knew, and I said, who are the young guys out there that, you can recommend? And his name came up from like 4 different head coaches that I know of, someone who's worked his ass off and it brings a ton of value. And so honestly, the interview process lasted about 5 minutes, and I'm really proud to have him here with us. And year 2, he's doing a great job.
I got a shout out. He's a Springfield College grad too.
God, I know. Was my wife.
Sorry, Kyle.
Yeah. Well, we wore it today, just so you know. I, as people who listen to the podcast know, I hurt my knee, and one of the people in the PTs, they wore a Springfield shirt one day, and I was like, "You go there?" And she's like, "No," and I was like, "Good," and just walked out. And just walked out. And everyone's like shocked. They're like, "What was that?" And I was like, "I'll tell you tomorrow." It's bled into every facet of my life, Jack. I hope you're happy. I hope you enjoy that.
No, it's really unbelievable how many Springfield College grads are out coaching in the lacrosse world, and I've gotten to know Cole, and very impressive young man. He's going to be very successful.
Yeah, he certainly is. And we're lucky to have him. And you joke about Springfield. My wife's a Springfield College grad, played soccer there, and went on to coach college for a number of years, kind of before, giving up her career to help me pursue mine. But you're right. A very proud group, and obviously been really successful.
Some might say too proud.
Yeah, well,
some, not everyone. I want to kind of touch on this weird thing that's happening with New England teams and teams in the East Coast. Everyone's jumping conferences.
Yeah.
I know you don't have a ton of influence over that, but I do want to know your perspective on it, and kind of how that does it change anything you do when you're I'm in the NEC this year, I'm in the America East, I'm in the MAC. Like, how does that impact anything else that you're doing?
I think twofold. Number one, when teams change conferences a lot, it's hard to create like lasting rivalries with people. When you're in a conference for the same long number of years, you kind of have all these battles with people and recruiting battles and on-field battles, and you create really, really cool rivalries. So I'm curious to see how that develops, as these teams are changing conferences. I think like one of the things that I've talked to a lot of, head coaches about this, one of the challenges now with all these kind of super conferences and, the comings and goings is like, scheduling is harder than it's ever been.
Right.
Like for us, like that beginning of March time, it's a hard scheduling time because a lot of these super conferences are playing conference games already. And so it's making getting really good out of conference games really challenging. So we'll see how that matures, over the next couple of years. But those would be the two pieces that I think are unique, to, at least from my perspective.
Are there any regulations in place where a school decides to be in X conference and a year or two later he wants to join another conference? It's just you can decide on.
Yeah. Well, the problem sometimes, and I think a lot of people don't realize this, is that, it's not like us as a lacrosse team can make our own decision.
Right. It's a school decision.
Yeah. You kind of look at Merrimack, and what's been going on there, and NEC, and now right to different conferences, and you're really just tied to whatever your administration wants to do there. I know, for us in our athletic department, and a lot of people are really proud of the way the fall sports have improved. The American East overall is a really strong conference, especially in the soccers, and both our soccer teams, had great years. Men's soccer right now went from 3-10 last year to 14-1. So there's a lot of improvement there, but there's a lot of different things to like take under consideration when these teams are jumping conferences.
And Jack kind of touched on it earlier, and you touched on it as well. Rhode Island's a great state. There's 3 D1 teams in it, and you're now a part of a Rhode Island rivalry, right? Yeah. I'm actually writing about that for the next issue of the magazine, the Rhode Island. It's so bizarre to me that there's 3 D1 men's lacrosse programs that are very prevalent, and they all play each other, and they all have kind of a history. I know you've only been there for a year. You're going into your second year here, but do you feel that? Like, what was your experience with the rivalry with Brown and Providence?
Yeah. I mean, I was a part of it here, as an assistant coach. I think it feels very similar just because of proximity, like the Duke Carolina thing, like our kids are seeing those kids out socially, like they see them all the time. No, it's a big deal. I mean, I think it's a huge deal. It's something we talk about a lot, and certainly very proud to have had some previous success there. And I know as you look at it, I'm looking at it now. I mean, the Ocean State Cup's kind of made its way around, and that's certainly one of our goals. We talked about vision. That's the first vision goal that we always have. Is you want to win the state, you want to beat Brown, you want to beat PC, and those are things that I know really, really matter to our guys, and it certainly matters to me.
Not only are you rivals, but you're all right down the street from each other, which is very interesting. I mean, which brings a different dynamic to it because, like you said, when the players go out, they run into each other socially. Yep. So that makes things very interesting and probably more an incentive to beat them, getting to know them off the field.
Yeah. And I worked at Brown and I've had great relationships with people there, and all different institutions and all really, really cool and awesome places and great programs, programs that are all run kind of differently and have different, certainly strengths and weaknesses, so I think that's been exciting for us to see, and hopefully, we can get back out in the practice field here in a little while and hopefully make some progress here on winning that first game.
Do you find Providence, probably not so much Brown, but you find that you have players that are interested in Bryant and Providence recruiting some of the same kids, or not so much?
Yeah, no, I mean, you'd be surprised. I think we recruit a lot of the same kids, all 3 of us. I really do. I think when you look at, some of our kids that have maybe chosen, to come here, maybe they're very business focused. That's something that, they have a lot of interest in. Maybe there's family history there, or they're very clear cut on they want to go the finance accounting route. No, we definitely run into, those guys a lot in recruiting. And I think it's always interesting. And we say this in recruiting a lot. I do think that when you visit different types of places, it just helps you make a decision, right? When I was going through my process, a part of my process when I was that age, I wanted to go to a school with grass and trees and kind of that traditional college campus. I didn't personally want to go to school in the city. So I think when a recruit maybe comes and goes to Providence and Brown, and they come here, maybe just from a location standpoint, they say, hey, I really love the city. I love what this is like, or I don't. And I think that helps, that decision kind of make itself that way.
Teams right now are kind of in the middle of making their schedule. And like you said, it is difficult. Can you let us in on any insights, teams you might be playing that you didn't play last year?
Yeah. We'll release it here shortly. I've mentioned it certainly to our alumni and to our parent group and to our kids, but, we'll open the season with Providence on February 10th. And then a new team that we're excited to add in, we'll play Harvard and we'll play BU, right? So those will be the 3 teams that we'll kind of start our season with. And I think that's actually something we talked a lot about recruiting today, but that's one of the really cool, unique things about being in New England is you have all these awesome teams that you can play. And not only certainly from a budgetary standpoint, but classes, time missed, you can play some really great teams here. They're no farther than an hour and a half away.
And I think it's great for the game too, to have BU play Providence and Harvard, play Bryant. And it's just great for the New England lacrosse. If you want to go watch BU play, now you can go watch BU and Bryant play at the same time.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the world of all those coaching staffs, and they got those guys doing an unbelievable job. All 3 programs that we start, the season with, and all different, and it's going to be a heck of a challenge.
Coach, thank you so much for joining us here on Chasing the Goal. It's been great. You did great. Just to reiterate, you did a great job. And thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for hanging out with Kyle for 45 minutes. That's probably something you didn't want to do today, but
he's never wanted to do that.
Put my paycheck in the mail.
Yeah. Coach, very nice meeting you, and hope to see you down the road.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks again for listening to New England Lacrosse Journal's Chasing the Goal podcast. For Jack Piatelli and Kyle Devitt. See you next time.